On the first anniversary of the attack on the U.S. Capitol, President Biden today accused former President Trump of pushing lies and holding a dagger at the throat of American democracy. Biden said that Trump refused to stop the rioters because he refused to accept that he had lost the election. Without mentioning Trump by name, Biden spoke to the defeated former president in a language that he understands all too well. In blistering simplicity, Biden said Trump was and remains a loser and a liar. I'm Brent, Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
It was an assault on our Constitution, assault on the Congress of the United States.
There were people in that mob who wanted to kill us.
Our democracy was on the brink of catastrophe that day.
I'm a little worried not enough has changed.
Some of those people have political power and are trying to disenfranchise large swaths of the country.
The big lie, pushed by Donald Trump, that is undermining faith in our political system.
This horrible lie is only gained in momentum.
The root cause of January 6th is still with us today.
Well, to our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day on this first anniversary of a dark day in U.S. history. You probably know where you were exactly 1 year ago when you heard that rioters had attacked the U.S. Capitol, and you probably know the attack was an attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power from one president, Donald Trump, to the next, Joe Biden. Now, those are facts, and that is the truth. But 1 year on, both Trump and his Republican supporters inside and outside of Congress continue to push the big lie that the election was stolen and that January 6th was nothing more than a group of patriots who were caught misbehaving. Tonight, America is as polarized as ever. Two narratives competing in a split-screen reality. President Biden says this is a fight for the soul of the country, and today he placed this struggle in a wider global battle of democracy versus autocracy. And he warned that on this solemn anniversary, it remains unclear who will win the future.
Certain dates echo throughout history, including dates that instantly remind all who have lived through them where they were and what they were doing.
1 year ago today, in this sacred place, democracy was attacked. Close your eyes. Go back to that day. What do you see? Rioters rampaging, waving for the first time inside this Capitol Confederate flag that symbolized the cause to destroy America. What else do you see? A mob breaking windows, kicking in doors, breaching the Capitol. American flags on poles being used as weapons, as spears, destroying property, literally defecating in the hallways, rifling through the desks of senators and representatives, hunting down members of Congress. We didn't see a former president who had just rallied the mob to attack, sitting in the private dining room off the Oval Office in the White House, watching it all on television and doing nothing for hours. The nation's capital under siege. This wasn't a group of tourists. This was an armed insurrection.
We all saw what our nation would look like if the forces who seek to dismantle our democracy are successful.
But they failed. They failed. And on this day of remembrance, we must make sure that such attack never happens again.
Well, my first guest tonight is Frank Sesno. He's a former White House correspondent, the former CNN Washington bureau chief, also my former boss. He's now the director of strategic initiatives at George Washington University. Frank, it's good to see you again. You have covered the White House. You covered the White House for a long time, and that includes countless presidential speeches. Put today's speech by President Biden into context for us.
It's virtually unprecedented. You know, you'd almost have to go back to some of the speeches that Lincoln gave when the country faced such deep division and polarization, and in that case, obviously outright war, to find rhetoric, language like that of a president directed toward the leadership of the country. In many ways, though, this speech is a year late. You could make a very strong argument, and I really believe this to be the case, that a lot of the narrative that has taken root in much of the Republican Party, that in fact the election was stolen, that in fact Biden is not a legitimate president, has calcified because Biden has been so slow to use language like this, to really call out what happened and to marginalize not just those who stormed the Capitol, but the then President of the United States who did nothing in those early hours.
Do you think that when he spoke exactly 1 year ago, do you think today's speech is the speech that he should have delivered then?
Yes, I think, and you know, this narrative that former President Trump promotes, and he did it again today right after Biden's speech, that the election was stolen, that the votes were rigged, that hasn't stood up in any court of law that's looked at it, that hasn't stood up to any audit, any factual examination, nonetheless, as I say, has calcified in the Republican Party. The kind of language that Biden used today, holding a dagger at the throat of American democracy, calling people out for bringing weapons and Confederate flags into the U.S. Capitol, defecating in the halls while they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," who was the then vice president. This is the kind of thing that the country has to confront and come to terms with and hear again and again, I think, for it to sink in, especially against the constant stream of disinformation, the big lie that comes from the other side on a constant basis.
Yeah, you know, our viewers around the world, I know many of them are scratching their heads and asking, how can so many Americans witness the same event and recall two totally different versions?
Well, I would join people around the world in scratching their heads in that regard. It is the most remarkable thing to have seen, because this all happened live and in real time for everybody to see across the country, and they've had plenty of opportunities to see it since. They've seen what courts have concluded, what audits have concluded, no evidence whatsoever of any kind of election fraud. They've seen the legal system bringing people to trial, hundreds of people to trial with convictions for what they have done. They've heard people who were there who said they took direction, they believed, from the former president, Donald Trump, to go and do that. And yet they have this completely parallel universe, alternative view of reality. It is mind-boggling, and it is exceptionally dangerous, because not only does it create this alternative view of what happened, but it creates a sort of a constant stream that is eroding confidence in American democracy and elections. And the next one's not far away. The off-year elections of 2022 are just 10 months away, and it's going to happen against this backdrop. So it's a very perilous moment in American democracy, for sure.
You know, I hear it very often here in Berlin, and I'm sure you hear it there in Washington as well, that the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol may have been the beginning, not the end of a terrible process. What are your thoughts when you hear that?
You know, it's very hard to say. I think it's very easy to conclude that America has lost its way and that the democracy has been fundamentally weakened and may not be able to recover. But I do believe that we have a very long history of crisis in this country, from Civil War to McCarthyism to the Vietnam era of turmoil and tumult. Nothing like this. We've watched presidents resign in disgrace, Richard Nixon, obviously. The Supreme Court decide an election, and we seem to find our way. This is different. This is much more challenging, but I don't think it's certainly not the end of the process, but I also don't think it's the beginning. We have learned. There are a lot of people calling it out, and a lot of organizations and individuals working to shore up democracy. So I think we're very much in the middle of this thing without knowing, without any real certainty as to where it's going to go.
George Washington University professor, Frank says no. Frank, it's always good talking with you. We appreciate you helping us put this into valuable context tonight. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. We need context, that's for sure.
Thank you. Well, we want to take you back to that day 1 year ago. Congress had convened as the Constitution requires to certify the presidential election results, an election which Joe Biden won. Now, not far away on the National Mall, thousands of Donald Trump supporters had also gathered to hear the president speak of a rigged election. But something changed when President Trump called on Vice President Mike Pence, who was overseeing the election certification, to reject Biden's win. Here's what else he said.
We love Trump! We love Trump! We love Trump! We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. We're going to walk down, anyone you want, but I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Freedom! Charge the Capitol!
And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
You can't steal an election! Let's go! Our house! Our house!
Even before Trump ended his speech, people from his rally had already begun to gather outside the Capitol building. The first group stormed the outer police barrier around the Capitol, while inside, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was calling the joint session of Congress to order. From there, things quickly escalated. Take a look. Now, once inside the Capitol, the mob spreads out across the building. They occupied the House and Senate chambers. They smashed windows, trashed offices. They assaulted Capitol police officers. Now, while this is all happening, there are still lawmakers inside the building. Some barricade themselves into rooms, hiding from the armed mob that is actively searching for them. Others take shelter in the galleries above the chamber. 4 people died during the riot that day, including one woman who was shot inside the Capitol. Nearly 4 hours after the protesters first breached the Capitol grounds, 2 messages went out. President-elect Joe Biden addressed to the nation, and shortly afterwards, then President Donald Trump tweeted a video to his supporters.
At this hour, our democracy is under an unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace.
Threatening the safety of duly elected officials, it's not protest, it's insurrection.
So go home. We love you. You're very special.
Well, that was how the Capitol attack unfolded 1 year ago. My next guest tonight is Cynthia Miller-Idris from the American University in Washington, D.C. She is an award-winning author and a scholar of far-right extremism. It's good to have you on the program, Cynthia. I want to ask you a question that, we've been hearing all day today, but, for months now. What we saw on January 6th last year, was that a one-off? Was that something unique, or is that the beginning of something that has yet to unfold?
Well, thanks for having me, and it really is a sobering day. Just listening to that footage and hearing the audio again is really startling and striking again how horrific it was. And I think it's really important to understand that it wasn't just a one-off. Even if we never have another insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, the signs for the past year haven't gotten any better. We have rising support for political violence. We have a really troublingly high number of people in recent polling who say that they will not support the results of the 2024 election if their candidate loses. And that's very high among Republicans. So, that kind of polling data says that we have a real crisis of democracy in terms of trust in the election system itself. We've seen attacks on election workers, death threats for election monitors, and more political violence in ordinary ways against teachers and healthcare workers and airline employees, just upset at mask mandates or vaccine mandates. And so I think we're going to continue to see this. And I don't think we can say this was one day or that it was the culmination of anything. But really, it's a continuation of something, or maybe a beginning of a really sobering period in American history.
Yeah, I mean, sobering to say the least. There is a study that found that nearly 90% of the people who've been charged so far in the Capitol riot, have no connection with militias or with other organized extremist groups. So what does this tell us about this threat? I mean, it sounds like the most of the people who've been charged are mainstream, everyday Joe Blow people off the street.
Absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing are two things happen at the same time. On the one hand, we've seen extremist ideas move into the mainstream in the U.S., and so that's really evident here. And January 6th made that abundantly clear, that people in large numbers have bought into an entire world of disinformation and will come together, sometimes even in spontaneous ways, and engage in serious violence. And so I think the threat of other event-driven violence around elections or around spontaneous protests is very high. But we've also seen changes in how extremist groups themselves operate because of the online nature of radicalization and exposure to propaganda. And so a lot of those groups themselves are more fluid, or people are exposed to the propaganda but never really join a group. They're following the group, they're mobilized and motivated by them, but not really card-carrying members. Mm-hmm. And so our counter-extremism strategies are completely ill-equipped to deal with those kinds of transformations, because we just haven't built up an infrastructure to see this as a threat from within the mainstream, or to see it as a threat that can be thwarted, let's say, through education or digital literacy work, instead of just through surveillance and monitoring.
Yeah, well, let's hope that as we move closer to the midterms, that things will get better and not get worse. I'm sure we'll be talking with you again. Cynthia Miller-Idris for the American University. We appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight, Cynthia. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, images of a mob storming the Parliament building, they will be familiar to many people here in Germany because it almost happened here too. In August 2020, nearly 40,000 people in Berlin protested against pandemic restrictions. A group of demonstrators breached a security barrier and stormed the steps of the Reichstag, the building that houses Germany's parliament. Take a look at these grainy images. They were captured by one of the demonstrators. The group reached the entrance before police eventually forced them back. Now, unlike in Washington, D.C., these rioters did not get inside the building. Several of them brandished flags from Germany's imperial past. Those are symbols that are now used by the extreme right here in Germany. Well, my next guest led the team of election observers sent by the OFCE to monitor the U.S. election back in 2020. Michael Link is a member of the German Parliament for the Free Democrats. He joins me now from Southwest Germany. Mr. Link, it's good to have you with us. Before we get to the U.S. election and to today's anniversary, I want to ask you, as a German lawmaker, about those scenes that we just saw from August 2020 when far-right demonstrators stormed the steps of the Reichstag. Do you think there are parallels between the events in Washington on January 6th and those that we've seen here in Berlin?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Unfortunately, there are perils, and we can see it with some state elections in Germany, and even in the parts of our Bundestag elections. People from extreme right-wing political parties tried to exploit what happened in the United States and really working on conspiracy theories. And there is a very, very close connection, both intellectual and political, between what's happening in the US. What was an alarm bell, it was ringing the alarm bell, and what we saw in August and back in August in Germany.
And how do you explain, then, Mr. Link, that things here are not as polarized and extreme as what we see in the U.S.? Why is Germany still getting more, I guess, of the middle ground when it comes to politics?
Well, thanks God, we have electoral integrity, which has been respected by all sides of the political spectrum. But increasingly so, we really understand that we need to defend this. It's very important that the general public has trust in what's happening in electoral administration. And we do that basically in a way which is not so much different from the US. We have a local electoral administration which is very powerful, which is very strong, and we have mutual control. But once that system breaks away, when one side, in the case of the US, President Trump, former President Trump, disputes the electoral integrity, then the whole system is threatened. And that is what we need to defend in Germany. We still have it. And we are very concerned to follow developments in the United States, which is our closest ally. We really hope that there is a way forward, that the next elections, the midterms, will see more bipartisanship in again administrating these elections. But we are very concerned of the first signals we see.
I want to play for you part of what U.S. President Biden said today about the election of 2020. Take a listen.
The truth is that no election in American history has been more closely scrutinized or more carefully counted. Every legal challenge questioning the results in every court in this country that could have been made and was rejected.
So is Biden right, Mr. Link? I mean, what did you take away? You observed the election in 2020.
Well, we observed, and when I say we, then it's the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, where the United States is part of it. And electoral observation it's the landmark, the trademark activity of the OSCE. We observed, according to a very, very proven and independent methodology, and we could not see any manipulation of the elections in the United States. And even more so, as President Biden put it, the court system in the United States checked, proved, and again these elections. We cannot see any manipulation. What we can see in the United States is that there should be improvements of the system. It should be easier to vote. Voter registration should be made easier, but that's not manipulation.
Well, Mr. Link, what do you say then to so many Republicans in the U.S. who still believe the big lie and say that the vote was stolen, the election was stolen?
Actually, I talked to a lot of Republican colleagues in the U.S. Congress as well, both in the House side and on the Senate side. And we really worked in detail on the report which we gave as international parliamentarians. We have had a very, very fruitful exchange. And my hope is that after some initial exchanges, that there is a general understanding that they really need to work to accept what has been done, for example, in Georgia, by Secretary of State Raffensperger in Georgia, who did a great job in administrating these elections. So what we try to do is really to explain that these conspiracy theories regarding the elections are wrong, that they are invented, and they are groundless.
Michael Link from the Free Democrats, a member of the German parliament as well. Mr. Link, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, finally tonight, Joe Biden delivered a speech today, the likes of which no living American or living person anywhere has ever heard from a sitting U.S. president. Scathing words about his predecessor who incited violence to hold on to power. Now, this is the storyline that we expect from countries struggling to give democracy a chance, not from a nation with the world's oldest living constitution. On this anniversary of the attack on the U.S. Capitol, people everywhere are asking the world's most powerful democracy, and rightly so, are you who you're supposed to be? Or are you pulling a Trump on all of us? Are you becoming the true big lie? We hope not. Well, the day is almost done, but the conversation, as always, it continues online. You'll find us on Twitter, either at DW News. You can follow me on Twitter at Brent Goff TV. And remember, whatever happens between now and then, tomorrow is another day. We'll see you then, everybody.